So let's look at how the two things that influence elasticity look in the diagram. I think the easiest way to think about this is to think about the extremes, right? So again, remember that we're talking about a diagram that have the quantity demanded in the horizontal axis and the price in the vertical axis. So think about a good that is perfectly inelastic, meaning that you change a price and you consume the same thing. The quantity, it doesn't matter how much the price is, people always consume the same, right? So it might be an unrealistic case, but how would the demand curve look like? How do you imagine that, right? Well, if it doesn't matter if at P1 you consume the same, let's say at P1 you were consuming Q1, and at P2 you still consume Q1, and at P3 you still consume the same, then the demand curve is going to look like that. It's going to be a, like a straight line, vertical line. So it kind of, in a way, it looks like an eye, right? So this is an example of a perfectly inelastic demand, right? Because it doesn't matter how much you price, whatever the price is, whatever the change in price, you still consume the same, right? So there's no change in quantity. Now, you can have another situation in which you change the price by a little bit and then you lose all your demand, right? So when you change at P1, your consumption is Q1, but then you change to P2 and your consumption is 0. You consume nothing, right? So how would the demand for that good look like? Well, that would be kind of a straight line like this. That would be, the demand will look like that. And that's a perfectly elastic. It kind of looks like an E, right? You put another thing here. So these are the two extremes. And in between, you can have where most goods are in between. There's no perfectly elastic good, right? There's probably no perfectly inelastic good, but what we have is kind of like in between. So you have a demand which are like this, in between. And the closer it is to the eye, the more inelastic the good is. And the flatter it is, the more elastic that good is. So that's the best way you can remember how the inclination of the curve relates to the elasticity. The more it looks like a vertical line, the more inelastic that good is. The more it looks like a flat line, the more elastic that good is. Now, how about the position on the curve? Well, that's actually easier because it has to do just with the price. So what we said, again, we have the quantity demanded here and the price of the good here, and the demand curve is downward sloping like this. And what we said is that when the good is more expensive, it tends to be more elastic, and when the good is cheaper, it tends to be more inelastic, right? So what we're saying is that if you move higher in this curve, you're going to become, the elasticity of the good is going to become more and more elastic. And you're going to be down in this curve when the price is really, really low, it's going to be inelastic. So you can have two different elasticities. Your good could be elastic or inelastic depending on how much the price is. So if that's going to be the case, then the only conclusion you can have is that the price of your good is going to move from, depending on how you look at it, right? If you're talking about, let's go to P2. If you're talking about P2, a low price is going to be more elastic. More inelastic. Then as you increase the price of your good, then becomes more your budget. Then the good becomes more elastic, and a high price, your good is gonna tend to be more elastic. And that at some point, from moving from inelastic to elastic, has to pass through 1, right? So at some point, it's going to have an elasticity of unitary. So what I'm saying is that any good, the higher parts of the curve will be elastic, passes through unitary, and the lower part of the curve are going to tend to be inelastic. Right? The important part here is that you remember that the demand, that you can have different, your good could be elastic or inelastic depending on where in the curve is. So you can have different measures of elasticity in different parts of the curve. One important thing to remember, and I do that now, is that remember that the slope of the curve is a change in y over the change in x, right? That tantamount to our demand curve is going to be the change in the price of x over the change in the quantity of x. But that's not elasticity. Remember that elasticity is the percentage change in quantity of X to the percentage change in the price of X. It's related, but it's not the same, right? Now, we are mostly done with elasticity. Now we have to talk about other types of elasticity that are also important. Two of them related to demand, the income elasticity and the cross-price elasticity, and another one about the supply. So we're going to do that next.
Produced by OCE Atlas Digital Media at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign.